A human rights commission, which reports to Saudi Arabia's King Salman, is investigating the alleged torture of detained women's rights activists. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the commission began interviewing activists this past month. And according to them, some of the detained activists have been subjected to torture, such as waterboarding and electrocution. The Saudi government dismisses the allegations as wild claims. Many of the activists were campaigning for women to be able to drive a car. Let's speak to Lynn Maalouf in Beirut via Skype. She is the Middle East Research Director at Amnesty International. Good to have you with us live on Al Jazeera. I mean, what do we know about this commission?
Well, what we know, it was set up at a time where there were some limited reforms by the king at the time, King Fahd. It was a time during those years, during that decade, the Saudi kingdom was starting to enact and ratify some of the international conventions, including the Convention Against Torture. It was the time that it acceded to the Human Rights Council. So there were some reforms at the time that were showing that Saudi Arabia was moving in a direction of complying with international norms and standards. But at the same time, this was all led by the state. And this included, as part of that process of reform, this saw the establishment of two human rights commissions, one set up directly by the government. So this is the one that we're talking about. Yeah. But at the same time, while that was happening, there was nonetheless a lack of intolerance towards any grassroots attempts to organize themselves in an independent manner, so that any independent human rights organizations at the time were allowed to operate for a certain while, for a few years, but after 2011 and then since 2013, effectively, there are no longer any independent human rights organizations in the country.
Okay,
so what we know about
Lynn, if I can just get in there, just because we end it with a timeline of what's happened and not, but that should we be encouraged by this current Human Rights Commission and the fact that they are reporting directly to the King? How do we read this situation right now?
So definitely it is something that we as Amnesty have called on. We have called on the authorities to conduct prompt and impartial investigations into the reports of torture of the detained activists. Now, our concern is about the impartiality aspect of this. How do we know? I mean, we need to keep pressing. It's good that if the reports are true, that these investigations are indeed taking place. We need to make sure and monitor that these investigations and the results of these investigations are being led in a transparent way. We need to know that the families of the activists are in the know of the process of the investigations, how this is being reported on, and any steps that are going to be taken afterwards based on the findings. So that means any accountability measures, people who have been found responsible for these abuses should be held accountable and redressed for the victims.
Okay.
And more than that, Saudi Arabia is under obligation because as a signatory of the Convention Against Torture, it is under the obligation to conduct this investigation. But it's also it does have the responsibility to protect any of the complainants or the witnesses against any ill treatment as a consequence of their providing the testimony, etc. What we know today is that these women and men are still in prison.
Lynn, basically, how do you then regard? You just said then, any investigation has to be regarded in a fair and transparent way. How do you actually assess what is transparent when there are no independent observers in a state like Saudi Arabia?
Exactly, and that is why we do have concerns with the process of this investigation, and that is also the reason why an impartial investigation is absolutely crucial for any credibility. Right now, no, we do have concerns because of the way there's always secrecy. This commission is a body with which we've had no interaction. We've reached out to them on a number of cases in the past, in past years, and we haven't had any feedback or any reports from them. So we do have concerns about impartiality, about transparency. Let's see where this takes us, next steps.
OK, well, we'll see what does happen. For the moment, thank you. Lynn Maalouf there from Amnesty International.
Thank you.